Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Margot Conahan. I'm ACRL's Manager of Professional Development. Thanks for joining us today for another webinar offered as part of our COVID-19 and Academic Librarianship webcast series. We have some additional topics planned for the coming weeks, so watch the ACRL website for those details. My dogs are a little barky this afternoon, so I'm sorry if you hear them right now. How's everyone doing? We know this is a stressful time, and thanks for being with us today. As I mentioned, today's session is being recorded. We will email out the link to the recording shortly after the webcast, and we will also post it online. We will share the webcast slides and the chat transcript as well when we send everything out, so you'll get all of that good information. Today's webcast is tips for suddenly switching to online reference and access services. I'd like to thank our presenters, Jason Coleman, Kathy Coleman, Lori Goetsch, and Cliff Hight for facilitating today's discussion. Jason Coleman has worked in a variety of reference and liaison positions at K-State Libraries since 1998. He became the head of Library and User Services in 2016. In this capacity, he oversees reference and access services for K-State's main library, as well as 2 branch libraries. He also continues to work frontline shifts and participate in training and supervision of student employees. Kathy Coleman has worked in K-State Library's Interlibrary Services Unit since 1984. She became the Interlibrary Services Coordinator in 2018 and has extensive experience customizing Iliad, which they've used since 2005. Lori Goetsch has served as Dean of Kansas State University Libraries since May 2004. She came to Kansas State after serving as Director of the Public Services Division at the University of Maryland's Library. She served on the ACRL Board of Directors and was ACRL President from 2009 to 2010. Cliff Hight has been the University Archivist at Kansas State University since 2011 and became Head of Special Collections in 2019. His stewardship includes helping the department provide researchers with access to unique physical and digital resources in the department's care. Additionally, he is a senior advisor to K-State personnel in developing the university's archives and records management programs. Thanks again to the K-State team for being here today, and feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Hi, this is Lori Goetsch, Dean of Libraries at K-State. Thanks for having this webinar, ACRL. We're happy to participate. We are here to learn as much as we are to share, so we'll be looking for those great ideas coming forward from you all in the chat box. I'm just going to start out talking a little bit about dealing with these situations from a leadership point of view. Unfortunately for K-State, this isn't our first rodeo. We had a fire at our building on May 22nd, 2018, and our building was closed for over a year before we could even open up the first floor to our users. So we immediately had to jump into dealing with disaster mode. We relocated 150 staff from the libraries and IT in about 10 days to 11 different locations on campus. That included things like buying furniture and laptops for nearly everybody. You may be finding yourself needing to get home equipment for people in this situation, and doing that quickly at the same time that everybody else is trying to do it. So we faced a quick turnaround time in buying furniture and laptops. The campus data center was in the basement of our library, and took severe damage. It was because it was in the basement, all the water that came in the building ended up in the data center and took out our campus system. So there was no email, no databases, no website. Summer school was looming, payroll was looming. The university immediately needed to take steps to move things into the cloud, and the library did that with our services as well. We also needed to take care of that continuity of operations and services, the first bullet you see on the slide. And that's what Jason and Cliff and Kathy will talk a little bit more about. We really needed to get physical and virtual service locations up and running immediately. This time it's strictly virtual with COVID-19, but we were able to do a physical service point after the fire. In terms of communications, immediate communications with your administration is critical. We met on a daily basis with university administration after the fire. With COVID-19, we've had daily meetings of the Academic Continuity Working Group, the Emergency Management Group, the President's Cabinet, weekly deans meetings and frequent deans email communications, and daily briefings with library leadership. You also need to keep in mind that you may need to communicate with your vendors and your consortial colleagues if there are certain services that you're expected to provide, others that you are no longer able to do. And Kathy will talk a little bit about that in relationship to interlibrary loan. We also have a very active local media here in Manhattan, and they want to hear what's going on. So you may need to be prepared to talk to your local radio or newspaper if you're in that situation. Otherwise, we've also been very successful in using social media, particularly a library blog that we started right after the fire that gives updates on, first on the recovery from the fire and now on the renovation of the library. In terms of collections, we've been in a unique situation in that we haven't had access to our collections for almost 2 years. They have been stored at offsite locations and are not available. They were, virtually every volume in our collection was smoked. There was a combination of water and smoke that put a soot on most of the collection in the building. Each item was taken out and cleaned individually and then stored until we can move it back in, which we hope to start doing this year. We had a plan developed to move collections back into the libraries starting just a few weeks from now, and that implementation has stopped because of COVID-19. Last but not least, there is compassion. We have staff who have different coping abilities and tolerance for change. And it's very important, it was very important to me and very important, I think, to our library leadership to make local resources available. We had counseling services come in and speak to us after the fire. The university has done a really good job of reminding people about the availability of those services now with COVID-19. We also used our professional networks and brought speakers in who had dealt with disaster planning in their libraries, or who could talk to us about what the library of the 21st century was going to look like as we started to make our renovation plans. The other thing we experienced was a variability in workload. Some people overworked, had more than enough to do. Other people couldn't do their work as well from an offsite location. And we just kind of needed to accept that and adapt to that. Another part of compassion beyond caring for others is caring for yourself. Self-care is very important in these situations. You need to make sure you take time out to eat. You know, I've seen suggestions about getting dressed in the morning. However, I will admit that I'm doing this in my bedroom slippers. But self-care becomes critical. You can't take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself. And I know Jason, I think, and Cliff are going to talk a little bit about that as well. So with that overall view in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
Okay, thank you very much. And we were really glad that Dean Laurie was able to attend this, because really the key to our being able to serve our users is her and the rest of our administrative staff being so understanding and compassionate and caring and communicative. It's really been a team effort, and it all stems from the top, and they're setting the stage for us to be successful. And so very grateful to her and her team. So this next slide here, I'm going to turn my captioning back on since it can caption what I'm doing pretty well, is an overview of all the things that we would like to cover, which we're very cognizant of the fact that we're probably not going to be able to get to all of this content, but the slides will be shared afterwards, and hopefully the speaker notes too. We've tried to address our main points that we wanted to make sure to convey. I want to point out that at the very end, we do have several slides where we've posted links to various resources we'll be mentioning, as well as some that we won't be mentioning, but we've cobbled together some of the links that we've seen coming through the library community. And there's so many wonderful resources being created. It's by no means comprehensive, maybe missing some of the most important ones, but I think there's a lot of good stuff there. And if you know of other links, please share those with people in the chat. I know there's a lot, but if you see something that's really, really super important to know about, please share it. So without further ado, I'm going to move along. So communication, of course, is something we're all struggling with. And one of the keys as a department head, I want to make sure that the staff that I have who are delivering services are aware of what's happening so that they can provide accurate information to our patrons. So in order to do that, it's very vital to reduce the burden on them of keeping up with 10 million emails and knowing all the different places to look, and try to compile the important information into one easy to access space. I've been trying to do that. I'm sure there's things that I've missed, but for that purpose, I use our StaffNet, which we use an Atlassian product, which is wonderful. And we can all access that from home. And I called all my staff right after the fire just to make sure they were able to get into this. And the main change that I've made to it is up in the red area under updates. I created a page which lists some very important information about changes to our services and what we can do for patrons now. But this has links to all sorts of resources that are vital for us to be able to keep in touch and provide access to information. The second bullet point here is, I think, another important point to keep in mind, that you always have to make decisions about who do you include in email conversations. I think I got over 1,000 emails last week, and of course I'm not going to share all of those with my entire team, but whenever possible, I like to include others. I know it may be overwhelming, but I'm hoping they can just delete something if they are feeling it's not relevant to them. And I think often I find that people are grateful for reading about things that are not maybe even directly pertinent to them, but they just want to know what's happening. So I encourage us to all keep people in the loop. Tools, there's a lot of conversation about what tools should we be using to communicate with ourselves, to do our work. And there's some variation that I've heard. Some people are suggesting this might be a great time to introduce new tools for workflows, like Slack or Screencast-O-Matic or Microsoft Teams. And my recommendation would be use what most of your staff are already familiar with at this juncture. Maybe in the coming weeks, that would be a good time to upskill and introduce new tools that you've been eager for people to adopt. But we use a lot of tools. This is a quick screenshot showing you a tool that one of our student workers made to advocate for student workers. We do have student workers who do help provide some of our IM services in the evenings, and they were eager to make sure that they were staying in the loop about what was happening. So they created a spreadsheet and asked us to update and look at the questions they're posting here and provide them the most current information. So I was so delighted that they took that initiative to do that. Wherever you can, simplify your communication processes. That's always a good strategy, but especially now when we're all being inundated. So I want to show you, this is our main schedule that we use for our central Ask a Librarian services. And it's a Google spreadsheet. We all have access to it. It's editable by all of us with the link. But one of the perennial problems, of course, when you're operating a complex service with many people is, what do you do when people have conflicts or are sick or can't work? We made that as easy as possible. All you have to do is go in and change the cell background to red to say, I can't do this shift or I don't want to do this shift. And then somebody else will see it, put their name in, turn it to a bluish color of some sort, and we're good to go. And that has actually worked really remarkably well. It's very simple, low overhead, and it works. Encourage your staff to give you feedback. It's really important to let them know that you want to hear from them. They don't have to worry about, they know that you're overwhelmed but as a manager, but it's really important to let them know that we need to hear from them. We need their expertise, their advice. And I tell them whatever method they want to use is fine. I do prefer email, but some of them don't like email, and I'm okay with them texting me or calling me or whatever they want to do, except for coming and seeing me in person right now. I'm going to turn it over to Cliff, and he's going to share some thoughts about the last bullet point.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. So a couple of the things that we try and keep in mind, or we've had to keep in mind a couple of times now, is the importance of keeping and having access to essential records. And that can be a challenge when you have to work from home. And we also realized that we have to be aware of institutional policies that govern where we can store such files. For example, if people have FERPA protected records, they may not be able to take those records to their home. They may need to keep them in a secure environment. So being aware of what those policies are is helpful. And similarly, you may also have open records laws in your state. If you're at a public institution, you may have to be aware of if you're using personal accounts or personal devices for work purposes, those can then become open to open records requests. You may have to disclose anything that you have in those accounts or on those devices. So the rule that we try and promote to people is it's generally safer to use work accounts for work purposes. So those are just some final communication tips along with everything that Jason had talked about. Now, another aspect that we wanted to talk about related to colleagues, and when I use the term colleagues, I include student workers in that because I noticed one of the comments earlier, yes, student workers often feel invisible because they aren't included. And so just know when I say colleagues, I'm also meaning student workers as well. We have to be aware of well-being and work-life balance. And as part of that, you may know colleagues who have, mental, emotional, physical challenges that they face in life, and being aware of signs for when they're experiencing a heightened situation so that you can help them and guide, provide the support that they need in those challenges. And part of coming into that is sincerely checking in with them on a regular basis to see how they're doing. And that's something we've tried to do in both scenarios, both after the fire and even now after during the pandemic. And along with that, it's also knowing what campus and community resources exist for people who are facing difficulties. So that when you know that maybe they're really struggling in ways that are affecting all facets of their lives, then maybe you need to talk about EAP programs, employee assistance programs, or things like that, and share with them those resources so that they can get the help they need in these times of challenge. And then as you think about where people are in that scenario, maybe their well-being is really struggling right now, being aware that you may have to manage the types of tasks that you're expecting from them. And so finding appropriate tasks that don't cause them to feel overwhelmed when they're already dealing with all of these emotional and potentially physical loads. So, and then another component that I think is significant is finding ways to acknowledge the contributions they make, knowing that they, might be going out of their way to accomplish different tasks. They might be doing things that are inconvenient. Just finding ways to help them know that we appreciate the work that they do. Those are different concepts that we've tried to keep in mind. And then shifting a little bit more to the work-life balance side, it's also important to recognize how people cope differently with stress. Some people, when they are in stressful situations, they dive into work even more. They'll spend even more time working. Other people will feel overwhelmed, and so they'll back off, and they may need to have a little bit more time to process everything before they can dig back into work activities. And as a result of that, sometimes you have to adjust the expectations for productivity. Some of you may remember Robert Kelly, a political science professor in South Korea, who is kind of known as the BBC dad for an interview that he was doing with BBC when his children dashed into the room and his wife came in and had to pull them out. He had very young children at the time, and he recently was interviewed by them again just within, I think it was earlier this week. And so that there's a link there if you want to watch the video where they interview him, and he talks about the challenges of, I mean, you may only get 2 to 3 hours of productive time in a day as you're balancing being a parent with everybody at home at the same time. And so as leaders, we have to be, and colleagues, we have to be aware that others may be facing those same challenges. And so our productivity may be very different as a result. Tanya Gonzalez is our faculty senate president right now, and she also tweeted a short video that talked about her children, and her children are on it, and she talks about some of the, it's evident some of the challenges that she was facing to try and manage it all. So just being aware of that, I think, is important. And as you think about the role that you can play as an individual, setting a good example is part of that. So something I've tried to do is I recognize that there are times I'm going to be doing email outside of the normal 8 to 5 time. And so I may do a delay delivery so that it doesn't show up in somebody's inbox at 9 or 10 p.m. at night or earlier in the morning, but it's in closer to that 8 to 5 time. So people don't have an expectation that they need to be doing the same things as me. Because I don't want to give that signal to people that I expect them to be checking email at all hours of the day and night. So that way they can keep that work-life balance a little bit better. And then finally, also being patient with people, helping them recognize that you're aware that it's going to take some time to adjust. And so when we're in these different scenarios, we've got to know I may have to figure out a different setup for my home office. So it may take some time to know how to handle all of those challenges. And so now we're going to shift back to Jason to talk a little bit more about communication tips for working with users.
Yes, thank you, Cliff. So there's a lot that can be said here. This is the challenge we're all facing now is how do we make sure our users are aware of the vital information they need to know? And we have some tips that we learned after the fire that we're re-implementing now, and some new things we're learning as well. So I'm going to go through some of the key points here. First, it's very important to place the information at the point of need. Don't rely on your patrons knowing the magic page they should have read. Try to put it right at the things they're looking at. And I want to show an example of something that Kathy has done very recently. This is our main interlibrary loan request page. And she, earlier on, once we realized that very few libraries were actually able to loan their returnable items, she put a conspicuous note, and I'm going to go to the next page to blow that up, trying to alert people to the fact that unfortunately, we can't deliver physical items to them now, and showing them an alternative, which she just recently created as well, which is an ebook request form that I'll show a little bit later on in the presentation. So put it right at the point of need. At the same time, you also want to create a centralized place with your really vital messages that are broad-based and will be relevant to almost all patrons. And our communications and marketing team is really good about that. This is an example of what we had done right after the fire. We had a splash screen that showed up whenever anybody came to our homepage, which we wanted to make sure they were aware of what was going on. Now we are doing this, which is an alert at the top of our homepage, which is pretty conspicuous. And if someone were to click on the library resources link there, they come to a page called Continuation of Library Services, which it has a lot of information, but believe me, there's much, much more that we could pack in there. We were cognizant of the fact that in some cases, too much is not going to be serving the interests of communication. So this is some of the vital information we wanted to make sure to share with our community. I am a big fan, and I would encourage you to consider opportunities to communicate with your patrons proactively, and think about what questions they may be having that may be stressing them out. And rather than waiting for them to have that stress rise to a point where they reach out to you to ask you what to do, reach out to them in advance and say, we're aware that you probably have this question and here's the answer to you. Actually, I want to back up. I realized I skipped be patient with patrons, but that's essential. That's always essential, but especially now when you're doing IM service, when you're talking to patrons on the phone, try to smile. It sounds kind of weird, but try to smile even when you're doing that. And they can't see you smiling, but the reason is because you want to put yourself in that mindset of being friendly, being patient with them. I also encourage you, as you're reading emails, if you see something that's vexing and you're wondering how this patron could possibly think that the library would be able to do that or still have that question, step away from your email for about 10 minutes before you reply, and you'll find that your tone will dramatically improve in 10 minutes, hopefully. But back to the proactive communication with individual patrons. I want to show you an example that, again, Kathy did. Many thanks to Dean Goetsch for being willing to have us use our shipping account to send shipments to our patrons who are living locally, but in this case can't really easily get to our campus. We emailed them all the people who had an ILL waiting on one of our hold shelves or a K-State Libraries item, to let them know that we were cognizant that they can't get it, but here it is sitting there. Why does it need to collect dust for 2 months? Let's see if they want us to ship it to them. So Kathy has emailed all of them, and they are so delighted to have us reaching out to them. And so many of them are picking us up on this offer. Actually, I'll be going in right after this to ship. How many items is it, Kathy? Can you unmute yourself? Give me an update on how many shipments I need to make this afternoon.
45.
Okay, all right, fun times. 25 years ago, I used to be a shipping specialist before I joined the library world, and it's kind of fun to go back to those days of packing things up and making sure they get off to other people in the world. But I think reaching out to our patrons, letting them know we're aware of their concerns is essential. So a couple of other points. I am always an advocate for, when we're referring patrons to other parts of our operation, rather than referring them to the one person who really is the main expert, refer to a team and try to, hopefully people can pick up the slack for one another, be aware of when one of their colleagues is having a really busy day and help answer. So wherever you can, carbon copy other members of a team, maybe an entire department, just to make sure that the workload can be balanced across your teams. The penultimate bullet point here is something that you may or may not be able to do, but I would encourage you to think about it. We have an email account that functions as a person, actually. It's an EID that any of us, my entire team, knows how to get to that EID. We can all get to it remotely, log into it. And the beauty of this is then we can see the sent email and see how we've each been answering questions. And then we can stand on each other's shoulders and using a metaphor there and take the best knowledge and the best ways of communicating and not have to always be reinventing the wheel. If you have an FAQ system, try to keep it up to date if you can. That's challenging. You might consider developing a new FAQ and tagging that with important words like COVID or coronavirus or closure. And we've done that. This is an FAQ that Stephanie Kiersey, one of my colleagues, recently made, which has a little more detail than what we wanted to put on the continuation page I showed earlier about some of the services and service changes we've been making. And then last point I want to make before I turn it back over to Cliff is that as you're making all these changes, it's really important to keep track of where all the things are that you change, so that when we get back to a sense of normal, you will easily be able to remember what you need to go back and unchange. And that was an idea that Kathy shared with me, because she's been making a ton of changes, thankfully, on the fly. I'm so grateful for her and her expertise. I'm going to hand it over to Cliff, and he's going to talk about the last two bullet points there.
Thanks, Jason. And part of it's kind of the developing the messaging strategy idea is basically thinking through, like in our case, post-fire, we had to think about how are we going to share with various stakeholders what what can we do? And so there was a little bit of a strategic planning component where we had to think about what can we tell our users that we can accomplish in this different situation. We haven't had to go through that same process as much during the current situation, just because we've already gone through it once before. And so that really helped us to have that conversation early on and set some expectations internally, as well as how we're going to communicate those to our users. And then the final point on there is another thing that we've done since the fire is we have a department email account, and we've had an auto reply on that so that people are aware when they email us that, hey, we've had some inability to access physical collections. And so they have a sense of why it might take a little bit longer for us to respond, or what managing those expectations a little bit. We've updated that in the COVID-19 situation, and you can see that at the top of the screen now. And then another component is in our signature blocks, some of us have added information at the bottom that just kind of gives contact info, ways to find more information about the post-fire environment especially. And you see Dean Goetsch's example at the bottom with some, this is an earlier version. She updates it along the way as different floors have opened. So that gives you a sense of ways that you can communicate to your users what's happening. So, and then as we also try and help our users, we're trying to shift. Obviously, we don't have as much analog or paper available. We have more to digital resources. And so one thing that many of you have probably been involved in is figuring out what fair use looks like in this environment. You may have to be consulting with legal counsel at your institution to try and get a sense of how much risk they're willing to take right now. And so that's another component to be thinking about. We were able to get some, as Jason mentioned, he's able to go into the library and do some work. We also have a temporary reading room, and we're able to send a staff member there about weekly to do some limited scanning for reference requests of materials that we have in that room. So there are some possibilities that we have to continue to help our users in that regard. Additionally, there are different apps that exist where you might be able to do mobile scanning that's going to make it a little bit easier than trying to use an overhead scanner. And then finally, because we're starting to use a lot of digital interfaces that people may not be familiar with, it might be helpful to provide brief tutorials for them so that they know how to navigate the various nuances of those applications. And now I'll let Jason talk a little bit more about the ebook component.
Okay. And Kathy, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, because I'd really like you to talk about this. You're the one who knows all the details and made this happen. So Kathy, I'll just preface it by saying that she did this last night. This is a brand new page that's live to our patrons. And Kathy, do you want to talk about what you did here and the choices you made?
Sure. Yes. Well, our first consideration when we had taken down the loan form last week was that sometimes patrons request things that we already own as an ebook and they don't realize it. And we wanted to be sure and be able to let people know about those, as well as these new sources that have been made available to us in the last few days. So I provided links on this forum. Hopefully the patrons might find some of these materials for themselves. If not, then our plan is to check all of those things first, to make sure that we can't provide them something online, to see if we could possibly borrow an ebook. There are a few libraries that will loan entire books, although that's very rare. And then finally, if we're unable to get something for the patron, then we have the question that's at the bottom of this slide that asks the patron if they want us to try to purchase it for the library. That's just a yes/no question that will come in to us on our ILLiad form so that we can see. And so then if they've said yes, and it does actually exist as an ebook, then we will shoot an email out of ILLiad to our content development librarians, who will go ahead and take care of it and let the patron know we've done that. If it does not exist as an ebook, then we will let the patron know that they will have to wait to re-request it as a physical item once we're back to normal again.
Thank you, Kathy. And I can't emphasize how helpful it is to have people with Kathy's expertise. She is so amazing. Her ability to update our forms on the fly and change our emails that go out, and it's so essential to have expertise like she has. Thank you, Kathy, for all you've done. So I'm cognizant of the fact that we're running short on time, and I do want to emphasize that we will be sharing these slides, and if people need to drop off early, there's no worry about that. Please feel free to do that, but as long as ACRL is okay with us doing it, we'll just stay on until we're done. And many of the things we've been mentioning, I do want to reemphasize, are on the last few slides, where we're sharing links to things like Occam's Reader, which is something Kathy alluded to, and some of the videos that Cliff has mentioned are there, and there's lots of other resources too that we've been sort of tangentially alluding to. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cliff, and he's going to talk about managing expectations.
Thanks, Jason. And in light of time, I'll probably be briefer with this, but some things to keep in mind is, as we communicate with users, make sure we're being as transparent as we can, that we're helping them understand what we really can do. That whole idea of under promise, over deliver is really helpful in this environment. So being cognizant of what it really means to under promise right now is really helpful. And then finally, in our case, because I work in special collections, we have donors that we have to interact with on a regular basis. We have funders and other stakeholders, and especially post-fire, we kind of triaged who we needed to contact to let them know our collections were okay. They were not damaged in the fire, by the fire or the water. There was some smoke damage mainly on boxes, and so that was something we had to get that information out effectively. Currently, the impact so far with the current situation is that we've had to work with donors who we had been planning to acquire their materials. Now we've got to delay that for a little while, and we've got to let them know, sorry, we can't come get it. We don't have a place to take it. We shouldn't be hanging out with you right now as much as we'd like to. So just being able to manage those expectations has been helpful. And then related to that, as we shift a little bit towards the advocacy side, it's important to think about how we can advocate with administrators as well as campus partners as we try and go through these types of challenges. One example for us was we were able to identify after the fire that we needed to still have a space that could serve as a reading room so that researchers could interact with us in a public space. And so we had to create a plan and work with library administration to be able to accomplish that. And that was something that we may have to continue to think about. How do we effectively communicate with our administrators and advocate for the needs that we have? As an example, I think I mentioned this earlier, we do have a staff member that goes in on occasion to scan things. And so that was something I had to advocate for, say, hey, we probably need to make sure we've got some space for that. And Dean Goetsch was very receptive to that suggestion. So I think that's probably good for that slide. We can talk a little bit about campus partners. As a result of where we are now, we've been distributed among, almost 10 different buildings on campus. And so we've had to work with a lot of different campus units and really be open to recognizing that we're guests in their space, but yet we still have some needs. And so working with them in ways that help strengthen relationships has been really beneficial. And I think Jason's got a little bit more to say about this, so I'll withhold on saying more at this point.
Yeah, the main thing I want to emphasize is that your community loves you. And that's something we realized after the fire. We were kind of shy about reaching out and saying, you know, what our needs were. But we did that, and then amazingly, they gave us way more than what we asked for, which we were shocked at. But we realized that they have a lot of appreciation for what we do. Of course, this environment with COVID-19 is different now because all of our campuses are facing this challenge. So we're not able to help each other as much as we would like to right now, but I think that maybe in the coming weeks, we can start thinking about opportunities for, as things might start reopening, how can we share and support one another? And I would encourage us to advocate and not be shy about letting our campus partners know sort of what our critical needs are to serve our users. As Cliff has mentioned, having access to our building spaces so we can continue to serve our really pressing needs has been so crucial, and I'm very grateful, as is Cliff and all of us, for our dean's advocacy for that. It's been essential. And then the last main point we want to cover, and we'll turn it over for some question and answer time, is some advice about things to think about with reorienting work duties, which we know is a widespread concern and issue. So briefly, you might think about what needs to be updated in your discovery tool or your catalog. You probably have locations that are not available. If you can, go in and try to update those location notes so that it no longer says to people, hey, come in and get this off the shelf, because they can't do that. Similarly, if you have retrieval options, you might try to suppress that functionality. We've done a little bit of that on the fly. We still have more of that work to do. I would also encourage you to think about automatically extending due dates for all of your patrons if you can, to alleviate their concerns about that, and emailing all of them to give them that good news that you've done that. They'll be very grateful. We're doing that right now as we I'm not, but some of my staff is. And this is an example, a screenshot of some of the changes we've made to our location notes. So after the fire, we had over 1 million items that had been in our main library that were no longer accessible. And we wanted to make sure patrons were aware of that and that they could still request them through interlibrary loan. And then recently our annex, which has over 700,000 items now, we used to be able to retrieve from it daily, but right now we can't do that. And we wanted to convey that to our patrons up front as well. This is an interesting time to make sure to think about key policies and procedures, and update on your website any essential changes, like 2 issues like where do you return books, how do I get things back to you, and hopefully you can say there, don't worry about doing that. We're extending your due dates. If you have concerns, contact this email address. That's the way we're handling it. As we move into the next few weeks, you can engage your staff in helping you to think about what are the policies and procedures we need to have, what can we change. Maybe this is a great time for getting rid of things that are just you're doing because you've always been doing them, but they're not really relevant anymore. And then we're all thinking about, this is an interesting silver lining to this, is that it's an interesting time to reskill and to learn and to explore. And I have some staff, and you probably do too, whose work was so tied into the physicality of the library space, who I really don't have much online project work for them to do, but I have been encouraging them to go in and take some classes. There's so much free education available online, and some of that's included in the last few slides, some great posts that people are maintaining about trying to capture a lot of great resources out there. And then the last bullet point here is that think about your other units in your library world, and maybe other departments on campus too, and what needs do they have that your staff and you might be able to help with? Or conversely, if you have needs that they may have some extra people who can help out, don't be shy about thinking about ways for that to happen. And I wanted to show you a fun way we've done that. This is one of my colleagues, Stephanie Kiersey, and her daughter. She's working from home, of course. And our social media, our communications and marketing team maintains an excellent blog where we've been conveying information for a long time about what's happening with the building. But now our most recent post is trying to put a human face on our services and let our users know we're here for you. Even if we're at home, we can still do things for you. So they asked us for the content to include and wanted to make sure that was accurate. So the text there is text that I gave them, and it's a long post. You're welcome to go and look at it. I think it's very uplifting. It's fun to see people's faces in their homes and their pets and their children. I've seen homes that I've never been in. It's actually been a great learning experience. And before I do questions, I just want to show you what these slides look like that you'll have access to later, where we've linked to a lot of things that we've come across. It's by no means a comprehensive list, but some of the things that we've seen that we think are particularly helpful. So I know we are at the end of our 45 minutes, but I am willing to, and I think Cliff and Kathy and Lori are willing to stick around and answer any questions that folks have. I should say I haven't been monitoring the chat, so there's probably lots of questions in there, but I haven't really been paying attention to what's been going on there.
Have we been keeping up with them, Jason?
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any themes or good questions you think that would be good to address?
I think it's been a lot of really good sharing of practices that other places are doing, and confirmation of some of the things that we've done that are also being done at other places. So
wonderful.
Really great.
Wonderful. Okay, well, we are so grateful to all of you for coming in. We wish you the best, and I want to close by just saying that one of the silver linings of this is.
Hey, Jason, there are some questions.
Oh, okay, great.
So maybe you can save your silver lining for later, maybe.
Sure. Oh, what questions do you see, chat?
Would you offer chat services, virtual appointments if you have a small staff and 3 to 5, and some of them have young children at home? I want to do something like this, but worry about overpromising something we can't realistically do. So managing that expectation of what can we really accomplish. Right. That's a great question. It's something we've been contending with too, and particularly in thinking about offering IM services over on the weekend. We'd like to do that, but we're also cognizant that the question is, do you want to offer it sort of, if it's there, it'll be there. If not, please don't be upset with us that we can't consistently staff it. I personally think that's okay. Ideally, what you could do, depending on your service provider, is have a message that appears when no one is logged in that tells them the situation, be upfront and transparent, that we are doing our best to staff our service and we will be less consistent than normal. If we're not online, please reach out to us through our email address. That's the way we handle it. But you know, if you we'll try to come in and be here available for live one-on-one consultations when we can. I think that approach makes a lot of sense to me at this juncture, and I think there's a lot of grace that's happening in this environment. People are, by and large, being very understanding and open and patient with one another, and that's so encouraging. So I think we can expect them to understand, for the most part, what we're facing.
Cliff, there's a question, any good advice for those working in special collections and archives?
Oh, goody. Sure. I think, so I'll answer that one, and I'll also answer, there was another one about what types of remote work have been working for student employees. I want to touch on that one as well, and then I'll answer the special collections and archives one. So, because there's a little bit of an overlap for us at least. With student workers, we were able to, some of them have already been doing projects that were really based on online resources, digitized newspapers, digitized yearbooks, where they were doing some building history related stuff, other projects that were like that. So we were able to have them continue doing that type of work from their homes or from wherever they were at. And then another component that I had seen other archivists suggesting, it was to have them document their experience, and as students during a pandemic, and with the idea that that would come to the archives at some point. And so we talked with our student employees about doing that, where they were able to do some documentation of what their experience has been like. And some of them have, like, one created actually a weekly newsletter that he sends out, and other people contribute, other students contribute to it. And another one of our students has reached out to other student groups that they interact with and asked those other people in those student groups to do similar types of work, so that, again, that opens up the representation of what a student's experience was like during this pandemic. So that's something we've tried to do with our student employees. And Jason may have other things that he can suggest as well. Related to archives and special collections, it was mainly, okay. Yeah, that's been an interesting one. Post-fire, we were also in the process of migrating to a new collection management system, which was an interesting time to do that when you don't have access to the physical collection. So we've been able to spend some time cleaning up records, any types of description that, finding aids or other types of description that we wanted to improve. We've spent some time on that. We've also looked at training that we can do right now to improve some of our skill sets, so that once we're back in the building, we may have better capacity to manage digital archives, or to be more up to date in other efforts that we're making. And so we still are able to do some limited acquisition type activities, but it's mainly like we can either do some limited purchasing and figure out a safe space to have that while have the item shipped. So there is a little bit of that type of work, but some of it has been, like I mentioned earlier, just maintaining the relationships with people so that they know we still are interested in what they're wanting to donate to us, but we just can't act on it right now. So those are other activities. Some of the things that Jason mentioned about policies and procedures, now is a good time to say, I've been meaning to develop this policy for eons. I've got some time to do that now, so I can focus a little bit more on that. So those are some other activities in archives and special collections that I think could happen.
Yeah, related to the student worker, that's a really interesting time for students. At our institution, I imagine lots of institutions, all of our classes that had been delivered in person are going online. And we've heard a lot of anxiety from students about how to contend with that. And so we've been trying not to make a lot of demands on them right now, but at the same time, we do have some who are very eager to help out. So we've developed a list of projects that they can help work on. Things like checking our links to our online resources is really vital in our database directory. Check those, make sure they all work. Let us know if they aren't, so we can get them fixed right away. That's one. We're in the process of doing a website update. So I've asked my team to, as they have free time, go through and read our web pages that talk about our policies and our services, and think about what's missing, different ways to combine them, and share their thoughts there. And then I also really like the idea of, I've asked my staff to explore databases that they've heard about, but maybe they haven't had time to look into. Things, we just recently got ProQuest Central, for instance, and I'd love them all to spend some time engaging with that. And then as they discover things that they think are interesting, I want them to write up a brief post or an email sharing what they found exciting. And if they want to, I'd love for them to turn that into something we could post to the public as a short video or teaser or something of that nature. And I'll be frank that haven't seen any of them do that yet, but I also know that this is a really weird time. So I'm hoping that as time moves forward, they will start doing that. And I'm not been too pushy yet, but I will be eventually saying, you know, I would like to see you do something like that to take advantage of this time to learn something new.
I think there's a really good question about how can we stop people who are overcommitted because librarians are so service oriented, and I think that's a really good question. I know for us, part of it's that managing expectations. I know post-fire, we had to have some conversations in our department about what's really reasonable. I had to pull, there were some people in the department that I had to pull closer to providing services, and others in the department that had to pull me back towards what's realistic in this environment. And so I think that's been a similar, because we've been through that once, this time we haven't had to really have that conversation. I think we still have some decent expectations, but there is, and it definitely takes some boundary making to say, okay, we're only going to go this far right now because we just can't go beyond this. But that's a really good question.
It is. It's a challenge. It really is. I have some staff, like Kathy's a great example, who is so caring and so concerned about making sure our patrons have the access they need. And she has so much expertise, but I don't. And I hope she's listening to me because I want to make sure she realizes that I don't expect her and don't want her to be working 24 hours a day. I want her to prioritize like what's really urgent, what can we put aside for later, and just hope that patrons will be understanding. And I think by and large they are. And I should say also, I've talked to her a lot, and I think she's doing a good job with not overworking herself and making herself sick because of too much work. So I wish I could clone you, Kathy. That'd be the ultimate solution to these kinds of problems.
Well, I wish I could clone all three of you. We probably need to close this down. People are needing to drop off and questions have dropped off. So I think we can put a bow on this, and thank you all for participating. We really appreciate it. And everybody stay well and stay healthy. And I know we'll get through this as a library community and as a country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your participation today.
Thanks.